Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Alex Worth. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Quorum, and I'm joined today by Chris Burgoyne, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs at the American Hotel and Lodging Association, for a Quorum webinar. This is the first in a four-part series that we are doing on how many folks in the public affairs industry are responding to the situation that has been caused by COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And what we want to do today is actually sit down with some government affairs professionals that are on the front line of the response and hear how they have been employing different strategies to be able to respond to the crisis and what they're doing from a public affairs perspective. So we're really excited today to have Chris to represent AHLA and to share a little bit about what their industry is facing, as well as what some of the concerns and how specifically they've used grassroots advocacy in responding from a public affairs perspective. So the agenda of what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk a little bit about the impact that it's had on the hotel and lodging industry. We're going to go over what AHLA was asking for from government officials. They launched a campaign over the last 2 weeks, and we're going to go behind the scenes with Chris on what that looked like while they were launching the campaign. We're going to hear a little bit about the results and then also hear from Chris what's next. At the very end, we'll have a chance for Q&A. So I would ask you to go ahead and submit your questions throughout. And there's a little question and answer button on the bottom. So if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. And you'll have the opportunity to submit question and answer. And then we'll have a chance to ask those questions of Chris over the course of today. So we're really excited that you joined us. And with that, without much further ado, we're going to dive in. As we do that, we just want to start off with a quick poll, which is, has your organization launched an advocacy campaign related to the coronavirus? So 4 different responses here. The first part one is grassroots advocacy is a regular part of our work, and we call on our advocates to action for coronavirus policies. The second is, yes, this was your first time running a major advocacy campaign, but the issue was just too important to pass up. No, you haven't run an advocacy campaign related to the coronavirus, but you're considering it. Or no, you're focusing just purely on your lobbying efforts and not grassroots advocacy. So we're letting the results come in here. We've already had over 50 of you take the survey. This number is going right on up, which is super exciting. And I'll share the results here in just a minute so we get a sense of who's on the webinar and can make this conversation most appropriate to everyone who's participating. So looking at these results, we've had 80 individuals take the survey so far. 42% of you say that grassroots advocacy is a regular part of your work and that you called upon your advocates as it related to the coronavirus. Second highest is 33% of you say that you are relying on your lobbying efforts. And then 27% of you are saying that you haven't launched a grassroots advocacy campaign around the coronavirus, but are considering it. So we'll make sure to highlight both some of the technical details around what Chris did with his grassroots campaign, for those of you that have already launched one, but also for those of you considering it, hopefully take you behind the scenes as to some of AHLA's considerations and why they decided to launch a campaign. So thank you for filling out that survey and giving us a little bit more information behind the scenes. So now I want to open it up and ask Chris to just give us a little bit of background. Obviously, we know that our world has been dramatically changed and that the coronavirus has had a very large impact on the hotel and lodging industry. But Chris, tell us a little bit more about what that's looked like and what your members are going through.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Thank you for having me and for this opportunity to tell our industry story. Hotels really thrive off of travel, right? We're in the business of hospitality, we're in travel and tourism. And I remember in January being out at a trade show in LA and starting to hear about what was going on in China and, how that impacted international travel. And, at that point, no one really knew what COVID-19 was and the coronavirus. And, fast forward a couple of weeks later, I remember being up in Toronto at another industry conference, and there was a lot of discussion around impacts on travel and when, viruses and pandemics like this begin to take fold, what type of aspects it hurts in terms of travel. So first we saw it from the business perspective, in seeing anecdotally, particularly some of our members' hotels in China, going down to the single digits. But then, as we got more into the month of March and everybody started to see their February numbers, we were seeing revenues go down by upwards of 20%, which is significant in our industry. And one thing that most people don't know with the hotel industry is the average occupancy rate is about 66%. But when that occupancy rate goes below 62%, our members go cash flow negative. It's a very debt-heavy business. These buildings are expensive to run, and it's expensive to foot the payroll to run it. So our two main expenses were on payroll and on debt. And when we started to see the occupancy numbers go down, our members got very concerned about our people and what we were going to be doing in terms of payroll. Unfortunately, as the public health crisis became more and more of a factor here in the U.S., and elected officials began issuing guidance not to travel, businesses stopped conferences, and government encouraged people to use precaution when traveling. As these continued, here we are today, where in essence travel has come to a halt unless it's for mandatory business. And we're seeing hotels across the country close. We're having to lay off staff upwards of 90% in some locations. Many hotels have shut down, period, because they can't afford to keep the lights on. So I give that background to say that for our industry, the economic toll has been devastating, but the human toll, the human impact has been equally as devastating. So looking at this campaign, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about further, but our first focus was on what can we do to help our employees? What can we do to support our employees? Because we're an industry of people and people helping people. So that for our members was always goal number 1, 2, and 3. And then once we got past that, it was important to figure out how we could keep our lights on. And, that's something that we're still figuring out now, and we're still working with the government on. But, through this campaign and through our partnership with Quorum, we were able to have some significant progress made and some real impact for our members, which I'm sure we'll discuss in a moment.
That's helpful. I didn't realize the 66% occupancy rate, and that going below 62% would mean negative results for the hotel.
Yeah, and one other point on that is that I forgot to mention is that, everybody looks at the 2008-09 crisis. Occupancy rates are around 50% at that point. Same thing with 9/11. So the way our industry is seeing the COVID-19 crisis on an economic and human toll front is the equivalent of 9/11, 2008-09, in essence times 2. So that will go into explaining some of the incredible response rates we've seen from our members, but it's that dire of a issue for us and many other industries now. Wow.
And do you have a sense of what occupancy rates are today for your members? Are they close to zero? Is it do you have a number?
If they haven't closed their doors, which I think it's probably getting close to 20% of our members have probably closed their doors at this point. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but it gets higher every day. It's single digits at best. Most states have said that, unless if, for example, here in Maryland and Virginia and DC, unless if you're doing official government business or unless if you're part of a critical infrastructure to the government, you cannot travel for leisure purposes. So we actually launched a campaign or an initiative called Hospitality Hotels for Hospitality, which is focusing a lot of our efforts around supporting the local governments and ensuring that our hotels do stay open, but to house first responders, to help with keeping folks in the business of helping other people.
Wow. Just out of personal curiosity, I've read many of these really wonderful stories of your members opening up their doors to first responders. Is that something they're doing pro bono? Does that come, at cost? How is those relationships usually working?
So it depends upon, the hotel. Our industry and what has presented us one of the biggest challenges in terms of our advocacy campaign is we're a highly franchised industry. So everybody looks at the big brands and think that they own and operate every single hotel there is out there. But the reality is 61% of our members are defined as a small business. So 61% of our folks either own or operate these hotels. They have the major brand that they're affiliated with, but to complicate it even further, there's many real estate owners that will own hotels, and then somebody that will separately manage the hotels. So as we look at our stakeholders, there's the brands, there's the ownership companies, there's the management companies. We also have independent properties and state associations. And to answer your question directly, it varies based upon the individual hotel and the individual company. We have seen some folks open their doors pro bono. We've seen other folks, set up partnerships with local governments that, really need to lease out the entire building. And then we've seen other folks that, have pre-existing relationships with a lot of the different companies, like airlines, for example, need to have a place for their pilots and crew to sleep. So it will vary greatly, but, it's an across the board partnership on many levels.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, as you just described, things are going really, really dire for the hotel industry and for many of your small business owners. I'm curious, would love to learn a little bit more about what specifically was AHLA's ask of government officials in your advocacy campaign, and what was the response that you were hoping for from members of Congress to be able to help out the hotel industry?
So our first goal was to ensure that our members' voice was heard and kind of give them the ability to talk about what they're seeing. And again, through the two lenses of the economic impact and the human toll, which was equally as devastating. So using Quorum's tool, it allowed us to put those capture those stories within the action alerts that we were sending out, in addition to our asks of the government. As I mentioned before, our first focus was on our people. So we had initially asked for a $100 billion fund to, in essence, keep ensuring that our employees stayed on our payroll, because, many of these businesses are being shut down at the request of the federal government. So we felt it was important that the federal government had a role to play in this. We ended up in a place where, through the Senate CARES Act, the unemployment benefits were upped up significantly. So many of our folks that had been furloughed or laid off were able to apply for those unemployment benefits, with, in essence, they had called, unemployment on steroids, something that folks wouldn't have seen normally, but it provided significant benefits to those that are out of work through no fault of their own or through no fault of their company. The second and third asks were around, access to capital and liquidity issues and forbearance for different types of debt servicing that our industry faced in a unique way. So we had, looked for industry-specific help on that, but we ended up playing into two different buckets, which was part of the Small Business Administration programs on the PPP program and the 7A program. And also the disaster assistance relief there. And then the second bucket was for the larger companies, which was through the $454 billion in the Treasury funds. But really, the three goals that we had were, first, again, our people; two, helping us with our debt and keeping the lights on. And then the third was really just telling the personal stories so that our industry was able to have its message heard. And, it was really helpful. We had, a meeting at the White House. We had calls with the speaker, calls with the majority leader in the Senate and the minority leader in the Senate. And the key message that, every elected official that our executives talked to said was, we've heard from the hotel industry. We know your story. We've seen the impact in our district. I've talked to folks. I've gotten letters. I've seen it on social media. And it all kind of played into, different components of this campaign.
Wow. That's really impressive, and especially on such a tight turnaround when you then are able to go meet with those lawmakers and to hear from them saying, yep, I've heard from the industry. So I'd love to go behind the scenes a little bit on the campaign. What was the trigger moment when you knew that you needed to launch a campaign? You mentioned, obviously reading about the virus early in January, but when did you get that, hey, we've got to be preparing to launch the campaign, and walk us through that timeline in TikTok?
Yeah, so it wasn't too long ago, to be honest. Our first kind of phase of this campaign was more on how do we keep the traveling public safe, and how do we ensure that, best practices based upon the CDC guidance and OSHA guidance in terms of keeping our employees safe. And, the messaging, as we all had seen, has varied greatly. And depending upon who the messenger is, it was a different message. I think we're all at the point now where everyone is practicing social distancing and everyone is practicing, staying at home. But it was probably maybe the first week in March that, our team had a significant shift from focusing on the safety of travel to the urgency of government intervention as it revolved around COVID-19 in terms of the legislation. So at that point, we were trying to figure out, what people were saying and what people were hearing. So we launched our campaign with the Quorum tool, and I actually see if I can find the actual date here, Alex. You probably have it as easily as I do of when our first campaign started. But, the thing that we did was we tried to capture all the information from our folks as actively as possible. And their stories, we then took and developed them into OnePagers as we started to figure out what was going on in each state and what people were saying anecdotally. But as I look at it right now, our first campaign was actually launched on March 16th. So it was actually what felt like years ago was just a little bit over 2 weeks ago. So this has, as I think all of us have felt, this has been an exhausting campaign, and one that was not nearly as long ago as it feels.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about the campaign. Did you have people immediately write their member of Congress, or did you decide to ask folks to share their stories with you first? Tell us of the thoughts on the type of campaign that you built.
Yeah, so it was both. We had our kind of general industry ads, but we were more trying to tell our story. We were trying to make sure that the narrative was out there that our industry was hurting. And, now every industry is feeling this, but, with the exception of the airlines, in cruise lines, hotels were the only other folks that you heard being talked about because we were feeling it in a significant way. But now, obviously, you'll hear a lot more about restaurants and retail stores and shopping centers and, just general, anyone who has a Main Street business is now feeling the impact of it. But for us, it was telling our story so that when we did have the more concrete legislative asks, people would be saying, yes, we heard from you. We've heard from your district. We've heard from people who have been engaged. And so our first phase was more telling the story. Our second phase was more with the specific asks, and those asks varied based upon COVID-1 to COVID-2 to COVID-3, and we're already shifting into what a COVID-4 type legislation looks like. So it's rapidly evolving, and, as much as we want it to be all about our industry, we also recognize that we need to play into the messaging of what Congress is focused on. So, we kind of have those two campaigns going on, trying to get our industry specific things inserted into what Congress is working on, but also continuing on the press front with the narrative of what our industry is seeing on both the economic and social sides.
Wow. And so to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty details, obviously multiple iterations of the COVID legislation that the Senate and House passed. Did you run a separate campaign for each piece of legislation, or did you focus just on running one overall campaign talking about the industry?
Sure. So I would have to give a lot of credit to Jamie Best and Alyssa Clevenger on our team, who have really run the mechanics of all of this. I've just been kind of playing quarterback to, in essence, to help support, what our messaging is from the lobbying front, but they've really done the yeoman's work in terms of getting the word out there along with the rest of our government affairs team and candidly our entire team. It's been something that, we've had, I think, initially it said 20,000 people, but we're up to 30,000 people and about 100,000 letters right now. And we did that, through multiple different campaigns. The first one, COVID-1 legislation, was more telling our story because that was focused on getting, the need or the funding available for first responders, which everybody realizes is first and foremost. The second COVID legislation, the Families First Act, was much more focused on our employees. And then the third was much more focused on, the access to capital and liquidity and forbearance and things that are needed to keep the business lights on. And as we look at the fourth aspect of it, it's going to be more, bumping up the numbers and fixing the mistakes. And, for our industry, it's going to be a long-term recovery here. People aren't just going to decide to travel overnight. People aren't just going to decide to, go into large groups or conventions. So we're looking at travel promotion and things along those lines. But our CEO has been very engaged on this. We have a platform called Hotels Act, which is how we've branded our grassroots advocacy. And, at the beginning of the year, our goal was to double our number. And I think we've about tenfolded that by now. So, our CEO, in every note that he pushes out, is telling people to take action. Every one of our committees, every one of our councils, at the bottom of their email is telling people to take action. Everyone's email signature is telling people to take action on Hotels Act. And, we also did a lot of individual outreach to companies, asking them to send it to their employees, because our membership is based upon hotel properties. But we're really focused on the people aspect of it. And, this is the first time our industry has actually been able to fully engage the resources we have in terms of the people. But it really took a lot of hand-to-hand combat, in essence, of reaching out to, people to ask them to send it to their list, and, emailing them 2 or 3 times in some cases, just to make sure that, it is known that it's a priority. And different messengers was also another thing that we found effective, where, you send out your blast email, but then you also need to have somebody send a reminder. But then, what really makes the action happen is somebody who has a relationship with them, encouraging them to send it to their list, is probably what I think we found, the best and most effective part of our campaign.
That's great to hear. I think a number of interesting best practices that come from that. One, I'd love to have every member of the association put the campaign in their email signature, because it just keeps it front in mind. And you sometimes forget the number of people that you interact with via email externally. But also, I think hearing your success that you've had of sending it out to the variety of member organizations that you have, realizing how franchised an industry the industry is really essential, and having that come from the key messenger. Whereas somebody may not know your name, may not know the CEO of AHLA's name, but they'll know the CEO of whatever the company is that they're affiliated with, and having that personalized message be distributed, I think is super significant. Also, I think, I'm curious, if you had to do it again and drive, advocates to take action, is there anything that you would do differently, or best practices do you learn that if somebody's on this webinar thinking that they're about to have to go mobilize lots of people, that you really think they should know?
Yeah, my honest answer to that is I hope we never have to do it again. And I really, my heart goes out to all of our members, because, people have built their whole life around these businesses, and they're seeing it evaporated by the day. I remember being on the phone with one of our CEOs who said, I just furloughed 1,154 people. And he said, I'll repeat, I just furloughed and laid off 1,154 people. And he said, I say that because I know each and every one of them, and I've built this company from the scratch. People have been with me for 20 years, and today is the worst day of my life. So, our goal with this whole campaign was to capture our members' voices and have them be heard. And, I give a big salute to our entire team. We were successful with that. We've had 100,000 people have their voices heard through letters, to your member, and, probably 30,000 people, but 100,000 letters. So, this is a campaign that I hope we never have to run again. This is a campaign that I hope that we never have to implement again. And I think it's very unique in nature. So, I can't say we would do things differently. I think we've done everything that we could do to support our members during this challenging time. But in terms of best practices, it's hard because you want to create these campaigns, but the campaigns in essence create themselves. So, we couldn't in our wildest dreams have ever had 100,000 letters written to the Hill on any subject that was out there. But the circumstances met the need, and then, fortunately we were able to help when our members needed it. Some of the best practices, I would say, is, that follow-up in trusted messenger. I think that those were two things that we had talked about before that I think, everyone gets a lot of emails, everybody gets a lot of things asked of them, but, following up and, again, having, it's the same thing as we do with our political action committee. One person can make the ask and it goes into the trash bucket. The other person makes an ask and they read it. And then when the third person who has a relationship with them makes the ask, people actually take action.
Mm-hmm. That's very powerful. And in terms of, did you have to explain the campaign at all to people that you were asking to share it? Did you send them a prepackaged email that they could send? Did you ask them to forward the email along? What did the nitty gritty of that look like that made the asks coming from them so compelling?
So keeping it simple. Everybody wants to explain the issue, but I think the key part is you need to allow people to tell their story and make the ask a little bit less the focus, because no one is really looking at what the people are looking for. They want to hear their story and they want to hear their impact. The lobbying team, will make the ask, but when, I reach out to a member from Texas and say, I have 125 people here telling their stories, after our first blast, here's what our asks are, they pay attention. And, it's strength in numbers helps you make the ask as a lobbyist to say that I have all of these people in your state or in your district that have taken action. Here's what we're asking for. I'm speaking on behalf of them. That is where the asks are actually listened to, and not that they don't listen to their individual constituents, but it's more of, simplifying things and making the ask. And, our folks aren't in the business of lobbying. Our folks are in the business of hospitality. So we just wanted them to tell their story, and then we would help on the legislative ask, and we would get the executives on the phone to follow up and say, this is point 1, 2, and 3 that you can do to help, all of the people in your district and all of the people in your state.
That's very helpful. So I want to dive in on that a little bit more on the results and how you used it. You mentioned to us earlier, 30,000 people now. Congratulations, who've taken action, 100,000 letters. The two pieces I would love to hear a little bit more about is, one, you put together OnePagers talking about this. Could you share with us a little bit more? What did those OnePagers look like, and how did you use them?
Yeah, so what we looked at it in 3 parts. We looked at the economic statistics. We looked at, how many jobs are lost, what this means for revenue, what this means for, the GDP and all those different the high level aspect of it. The second part of it was the personal stories and, all the things that we've talked about before. And then the third part was press in the state around the issue. So it really was a 3-pronged approach in terms of the economic impact, the social impact, and then the, media and people paying attention on it. And, we would do the letters, but then we would also follow up on the social media side as it got closer. Because as everybody's out of the office, I have to imagine that, no one's ever not seeing the social media aspect of it. So I felt that tool was specifically helpful in cases like this where you're trying to get attention. And, certainly more people take action with the letters, but, the social media part of it was in the thousands as well.
Wow. So you had your members and employees of your members tweeting at members of Congress and sharing with them the impact.
Yeah, and they would link it to the state fact sheets. They would link it to our website. They would link it to articles. And, we were able to pre-populate all of that through your system, which was very helpful. And then, get it out through our channels and through their channels as quickly as possible.
That's really impressive, of combining it all together in both fact sheets as well as the social media. And then from the side of using, the messages and direct asks to lawmakers, would you sit down and meet with them in person? Would you do a Zoom meeting? Would you send an email and say, hey, just wanted to make sure you saw how many people wrote your office? How did you make sure to communicate that presence to those individuals, to lawmakers?
So I would package it up, and our lobbying team would package it up and, reach out to individual states directly on it. And, the key focus was people of jurisdiction on, the different packages that were moving through. The key focus was on leadership as they were, really driving the ship on this to see it move as fastly as it was. So it was a combination, but then what I think was also very helpful was the media was paying a lot of attention to the things that we were putting together and kind of telling the story for us on that, because the content that we were able to get from our members and from our economic folks was powerful and significant. And having that content and having those stories helps drive the advocacy campaign and helps drive the media side of it, certainly.
That's great to hear. So, bigger picture, you put in all this energy and effort. Obviously, the Phase 3 bill has passed. What were the results? Did you get what you were looking for out of that legislation?
So we think there needs to be more done, but we do think that it was significant progress, and it helped a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Again, I think the increased unemployment benefits is very helpful to people who have been laid off or furloughed. The Small Business Administration funding on these different type of loans is very helpful. The Treasury funds are very helpful. One specific thing that we had a lot of success with was on the SBA loans. As I mentioned before, our business is, heavily dependent upon the franchise model and very fragmented. So people, as defined, the Small Business Administration classifies a hotel as 500 employees or underneath $35 million in revenue. We had, through a lot of these letters, focused on the need to expand that definition, but given the statute definition of 500 being the number, by educating lawmakers through this campaign, we were able to tell the story that some franchisees have multiple hotels, in which multiple hotels aggregated over those properties would be above 500 employees and be above 35 million in revenue. But when they're counted separately, we can get those funds out to, hotels across your district or hotels across, different states. So that was probably the biggest success that we had out of this campaign, was having legislators understand the complexities of our business model and having them understand that, that 500 person definition needs to be per location, not as an aggregate across properties. So by that, we were able to open up the access to a significant portion of our membership, because as I mentioned before, 61% of hotels are defined as a small business. But if you were to clump them all together, that number would be much less than that. So that, to me, was one of the biggest things. And then also showing the significant job loss in furloughs that were coming as a result of in essence, zero revenue our industry was seeing. We want our people to be helped. We candidly don't have the ability to do that right now because of the restrictions that the government has put on travel. So we wanted to make sure that, we were getting the statistics across of how many people were being laid off, how many people were being furloughed as a result of COVID-19. And I think giving lawmakers a sense of how many people were impacted in our industry specifically, they recognized that this was a really big problem for multiple industries. And by giving the numbers of our industry, I think they realized that they had to bump up those unemployment benefits to a significant level. And as we saw with the most recent jobs report, it's a good thing they did that, because over 3 million people claimed for unemployment. And I have to imagine that number is going to be the same, if not more, every week going forward until we get through this crisis.
I think that speaks to the importance of the work that you and your team have put in. The last series of questions that I have before we open this up to Q&A, and as a reminder for folks on the webinar, feel free to submit your questions if you just pull your mouse down to the bottom of the screen. There's a little button that says Q&A. Is just a question for you, Chris, of what's next, both from a policy perspective. What are the next items that you're hoping that lawmakers are going to consider and pass that would help the hotel industry? And then also, what's next from the grassroots perspective? You've got 30,000 people that have taken action. How do you plan to continue to engage them if you plan to do?
So on the legislative front, we have some serious concerns over the debt side of our industry. There's an article in Axios today in Politico talking about a letter that we sent to the Fed, Treasury, and the SEC talking about the need for forbearance, which is, giving flexibility to hotels when, they're not able to meet their debt needs. So some of these loan structures are very rigid in nature and need some government guidance to say that, they can make adjustments on that front. The longer that this crisis goes, the more that will become an issue. So we're trying to work on that issue. I think a lot of the mechanics is going to be what we're focused on, when the regulators put out their guidance, how it actually directly impacts our industry and what changes we think need to be made. And then, as I mentioned before, what's the path forward? Once America is open for business again, once the world is open for business again, how do we get people traveling? How do we get people staying in hotels? And how do we get people comfortable in large crowds again? So for us legislatively, that's where our focus is. When it comes around the grassroots front, I think that's a question that we need to discuss further, because people are engaged right now because they see the need and they know that it's important to be engaged, and we've told them. And so I think we need to figure out how we can continue to show them value from being engaged. And I think, our industry has seen the importance of it, but you need to stay relevant, and we need to keep doing what we're doing on the advocacy front, so that when we do make the ask of them, they know it's important, and they see the value of it, and they see the return and investment of their time on this. So I think as it revolves around COVID-19, we're going to continue to have a robust grassroots front, because the economic and social impact is real. As we move through this, I think we need to be very targeted of how we engage our grassroots, because not everybody is going to feel the same way about every issue that we're moving on going forward. So I think we'll continue on this path for the foreseeable future, and then once we get through this, we'll certainly have to come up with a different game plan.
Something I know many people are going to be working to figure out, and that our team will be spending more time on as well, as we see this outpouring of grassroots support. That big question of, okay, how do you keep that momentum going, especially thinking beyond COVID and converting those people into consistent advocates. So both an exciting area of possibilities, but also potentially some challenges to come. As I mentioned, we want to open it up here to Q&A. So we've got a couple of questions, but please feel free to submit additional questions that you've got for Chris. Two just administrative items that I want to note. One, obviously, you can learn more about Quorum and Grassroots at www.quorum.us/grassroots. And happy to talk with anyone who would be interested in a little bit more about some of the different mechanics that Chris used to enable this campaign to happen. The second, and this is the exciting one, is that we're going to be back tomorrow on the webinar, 3 p.m. Eastern, so same time, with the head of public policy at DoorDash, talking about how they are engaging state and local officials during the coronavirus with their Open for Delivery campaign. So we've got Max Rettage coming to join us. It's going to be really interesting in terms of scaling outreach out across the entire country, as well as how they, from a public affairs perspective, have crafted their Open for Delivery campaign and are responding in their own way as their industry obviously is significantly impacted. So would invite you all to join. You had the opportunity with the registration link, and certainly if you just reply to any of the Quorum emails, we can make sure that you're registered for that if you haven't signed up already. But we're looking forward to having you tomorrow. And I actually believe, now that I'm saying it, the same link should work for you all for the webinar that we're doing tomorrow at 3. So with that, I want to open it up here to Q&A. The first question that we've got for Chris is, did you have a template letter that people could use to write their own letters? Sometimes legislators see about 100+ copies of the same text, which at least is a ditto effect.
So we had the form letter, but then we had a section where you could insert your personal story. And, you know, that's where we received the most value, was giving people the ability to tell their personal story, because the form of it was the same, you know, the ditto effect. But when you read these stories, and Alex, I know you and your team have looked through some of them, I mean, you can't not read every one, because they're just straight from the heart and they're devastating in nature. So for us, that was key. And, you know, we pulled a lot of those stories and, you know, reached out to folks directly and asked them if we could engage them with media and, you know, publicly with elected officials. And that, to me, the ability to capture those personal stories by far was the most powerful part of this campaign.
Wow. The next two questions come around your one-pagers. So the first one was, did you make specific one-pagers for each member of Congress, or did you do it by state?
We did it by state. You know, fortunately, we work with a strong PR team, and they were very helpful in this whole process, plus communications and the folks that used to be at FP1, or their new part of it. But they were super helpful, and these guys are real pros at being able to figure out how to get this stuff to market really fast, and, you know, in a campaign type atmosphere. So they were super helpful of us doing that, because we just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to do this all on our own. But it was important to keep it to one page. And I think that was one of the other questions was, you know, do we have a one pager for each one? No, we just tried to do one pager for each state. And, you know, with something at this level, you can't really go granular down to the district level. People need to know the macro aspects of things, and it definitely hit home with, you know, folks across the country.
Mm-hmm. And then the second question that came on your one-pagers is, you said you looked at your one-pagers in three parts: high-level economy, emotional stories, local coverage. Were each of those one-pagers, or did you cover all 3 points on the same document?
All 3 points on one document. People have a very short attention span, myself included, and if you're not on one page, then, you know, no one's going to read what's on the second page.
We've got one more question that's been submitted. If anyone else has questions, now would be the time to share them. And I saw that somebody just submitted that in. But the next question is on how much are hotels opening up to shelter the homeless populations in major cities, or as alternative locations for hospital patients who don't need critical care during a surge in patient admissions?
I think I had somewhat mentioned it before, but it really varies by the state. And again, due to our fragmented business model, you know, there isn't a one size fits all. But AHLA launched Hospitality for Hope, which was an initiative that, you know, really gave our state associations and brands the tools that they need to engage with Health and Human Services and state and local government to create those type of partnerships. So we are collecting data from all of them to kind of figure out how people are implementing these type of partnerships. And on our website, it's, you know, it's a highlighted, spotlighted feature. So I know that there's been questions on, you know, the different populations and the different segments of those in need. And, you know, I think, again, everyone has kind of been doing their own thing in their own way. Which is, you know, part of the power of our industry is that they, you know, are able to do things that fit the unique need in that city or in that district. For example, you know, what's going on in New York City is totally different than what's going on in Midland America, or, you know, different than what's going on in California. So everyone has really been very good at adapting to the specific needs of their community. And, you know, as I've also said before, you know, we're an industry of people helping people. So our members have been incredible in trying to do all that they can to help their communities get through this crisis in a way that we can all come through it together.
Mm-hmm. We had two more questions submitted. Did a reduced legislative staffing play into your grassroots strategy? If so, how?
So yeah, I think that's where the social media came in a bit, because it was able to get folks' attention pretty quickly. We also had a robust grass-top strategy in terms of getting CEOs and executives on the phones with members directly. Again, this was a strength in numbers in terms of the letters, being able to say that you had 100,000 letters sent to the Hill on a specific issue gives you credibility that, shows that you've been harmed by this in a specific and real manner. Without all of the legislative staff there, emails was clearly a method of which we use to our advantage. But the social media aspect of it is something that not all of our members had the ability to engage in, but the ones that did definitely utilized it. And I think, again, seeing the numbers really got people's attention. So it was a little bit easier to get them on the phone or to get their attention, or even have their boss be able to, speak to our folks for a quick moment.
Wow. The next question that came in for you, Chris, was, can you talk a little bit more about the SBA loans, ensuring lawmakers understood the need to look at your members by property under 500 employees versus the aggregate?
Yeah, so with our business model, there are so many different business relationships. There can be one person that owns it, and then another person that manages it. And then for the next property, the same company can manage it, but somebody else owns it. So what we're working on right now is trying to ensure that the regulators understand those different business natures to ensure that, as many people can take advantage of the program as they are intending for them to use it for. So it was really just being able to educate them on, the different complexities that are by nature in our industry, so that, they can write the rules and write the laws in a way that helps the most amount of people. So, for us, it was just a full education campaign on that. But that's going to continue as it goes, certainly through the reg process and the rulemaking and the implementation of the whole program.
Chris, last just question for you. Anything else that you think the audience today should know about the hotel industry or your grassroots campaign that you want to share as we conclude?
Well, thank you guys for this opportunity. And again, Quorum has been a great partner, and Jamie and Alyssa on our team, and Isabella has been working with you guys for a long time now. And you all have been very helpful to us in terms of giving us the tools that we need for our members to tell our story. For the hotel industry point of view, this is going to be a long road. It's been a long road. We've been seeing this for well over a month and a half now, globally. And our industry, they turn the light switch on tomorrow and we all go back to the office. People aren't just going to begin traveling overnight. So we're in this for the long haul to support our members. We're in this for the duration of kind of all of these economic and legislative talks, because our members are just good people by nature. I mean, everybody loves to go to a hotel. Everybody loves to experience what our industry has to offer. And just seeing the way that they're being impacted by this, economically, yes, but more on the human toll side. It's just been a really powerful experience. And, it's one of those times where, being in government affairs, you really have the ability to make a big difference for people, not just in their business lives, but their personal lives. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and, we're going to keep telling our members' story, and we appreciate the partnership with Quorum to be able to do that in an effective and efficient manner.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you taking the time to join today, share us a little bit more about what your industry is going through and the work that you're doing to be able to really make a difference. And it's exciting to see those results. And obviously, we here on the Quorum team are very happy to be able to have helped with that. For those of you on the webinar, thank you for taking the time to join. A recording of this will be available. We'd ask that you fill out just a quick survey that's going to pop up here about your experience on the webinar and the materials that we shared today. And we'll hope to see you back here tomorrow, 3 o'clock, as we talk to DoorDash about their efforts at the state and local level to engage with policymakers. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.